Kelly,
Yes, I'm here.
I heard you the whole time and then we got cut off. Isn't that fascinating? Hey, folks, it's a live show. Settle down. Kelly, how's it going in Kansas today?
It's sunny, a little bit cool, but it's going great. Thanks
Well,
for having me, Alan.
I'm glad to have you on. I'm glad to expand away from Canada and its pile of nonsense laws and move into some more intelligent areas in the world. And Americans are, we are actually outnumbered. Canadians are actually outnumbered by Americans as listeners to this show. And so, and around the world, a lot of people are starting to get this message of awareness. So let's talk to you a little bit about how you got even involved with this. Like I always say this, once upon a time, you were a little boy who didn't know anything about this particular substance. And how did you come across cannabis?
Yeah, great question. Couple different ways, actually. I have relatives who farm, and so there was always, wild hemp that was growing on some of their property, and it was actually near an old dance barn. So we always used to joke that it was those hippies that were throwing out those seeds, and they were smoking the dope and dancing in the barn and all this. Well, um, the then when I got a little bit older, I was about 12 years old, and my father. Well, so this was during the Reagan era, by the way, and so we would learn about dare and say no to drugs and get that indoctrination that you were talking about. And I'd go home and bring it up to my parents, and my father told me that he studied hemp and actually the eradication process of the plant while he was getting a biology degree at Kansas State University during the 1970s. So it kind of began with science ultimately.
Oh, you mean fact-based research?
Right.
Sounds like your dad would make a pretty crummy politician. He'd need to move ahead with beliefs and notions and fears instead. But I like the way your dad's come at this. So, what were you doing the whole time when your dad was figuring this out? You were just eagerly taking it all in, or how was it going for you?
I was. So I thought, well, this seems really bizarre. First of all, my generation was being told that we were going to save the earth and that we needed to come up with renewable sources of energy and regenerative agriculture and find out different ways of making plastic and all these things that are polluting the earth. And so I thought, that's really odd and puzzling that especially specifically agriculturally based state was working so hard to eradicate something that we know grows naturally well here.
Like an
So
an inherent substance that can lead to a successful tilling of the land, right on up to providing a good product for somebody. Let's get rid of
right.
that.
Yeah. Let's just go ahead and spend taxpayer money on top of it to enter farmers' land and eradicate it. Yeah.
Well, that
So
is the
I
program here. We have a premier in this province who has decided to, and the entire country is deciding to repress these natural awarenesses and the study thereof. And they keep crying about how there's not enough science, not enough proof. We don't know all these things, even though the data has been there condemning them to make sure they continue to research it. They say they won't. They say that there's not enough information to research, and then they say there's not research enough to provide information and repress the democratic ability to proffer with this stuff. So I'm glad you're on top of that as well. It seems to be a pervasive technique of the rulers.
it can often be, yeah. And so with specifically this information that I have uncovered, so I guess the story goes that throughout the years I have been studying up on the relationship with the plant and with humanity and how humanity has um, encountered it, how the many uses of it, like you've said. And so recently, in September, I discovered these studies that my father was talking about, and so I've tried to dig deep into those on a couple different levels, and it's very interesting. And I don't know how deep you want me to go, with all of this, Alan, but um, we know that certain conflicts of interest exist in certain research environments, but since the 70s and the late 90s and 2000s, we've developed some really a lot better research integrity requirements to make sure that certain conflicts of interest don't exist anymore.
Well, give us an
But what
example of one kind of conflict of interest that you're able to flatten with this methodology.
Yeah, so one of the conflicts of interest with these three publications I've discovered are um, all of them were either overseen or they at least gave acknowledgments to what was called the Marijuana Steering Committee, which was under a governor at that time. So that was a state agency that was law enforcement related that had to do with all three of these what otherwise would have been academic research. So that kind of places either a bias or at least a perception of a bias
Sure.
on the conclusions. Another one, though, that I think is somewhat more important, but just as equally perhaps, is all of them gave acknowledgments to the funders, and those funders were influencers, and they were Elanco Production Company and Eli Lilly. So, you have pharmaceutical manufacturers who were also interested in the conclusions and outcomes of these studies.
I don't
So,
know why they
to me,
wouldn't be. They either need
well,
to repress it or get in on it.
and now we see that a lot of them are starting to get on it. You see patents coming up all the time in the U.S. and elsewhere that, yeah, companies are realizing they need to get behind this because we have gone down a direction, and the opioid epidemic is a perfect example of the damaging path that this has caused.
Yeah, and the opioid epidemic, from my cursory research so far, and I do try to spend as much time as I can to keep on top of this stuff, that just about every state in America has a up to 25% drop in the opioid addiction rate in states that have gone ahead with the legalization and or availability of cannabis. Have you heard about that?
This is true, and that is in the medical cannabis access aspect. Yes, you are absolutely correct. And so those types of studies, and actually it was just announced, I think yesterday, that teen usage has gone down significantly in Colorado and other states that have legalized medicinally as well, in addition to other types of harder drugs, opioids, and alcohol.
Wow. So that's a concern that we have up here in Canada and a lot of places. It's the same old tired trope where they invoke the children as being, endangered by what's going on, and they
Right.
provide only the information that the weakest link of the children, or to be more specific, the folks that don't really know what's going on with it yet, like a table saw or some kind of farm machinery. I don't know how well you'd do if you got into a thresher and you didn't really know what was going on, but they just trade on the fact that they're going to drum up all of the worst potential results and completely ignore all the positive results. And this is supposed to be education.
Right. Exactly. And we, one of the ways that I've been helping here in Kansas, I'm working on the industrial hemp side, as well as trying to really provide evidence-based data to the medical cannabis movement here in the state, and that's done through the group Bleeding Kansas Advocates. They've done an amazing job, but really it is about the children, and the group, the coalition I'm working with on the medicinal side, they are parents of children who have suffered for years trying to get medicine, and the comprehensive legislation that we have developed, it's called the Kansas Safe Access Act, Senate Bill 187. It is protecting the children, and we know that the children are our future, and we definitely have protecting public health in general in mind.
Okay, well, let's take a little pause on that note and honor those children with this brief break right here.
What about the children? To ignore is so easy.
Won't somebody please think of the children?
Children can give us children.
Okay, so thanks for that. That's a little bit of silliness there, but it really drives me nuts how they lean on the one side of all of this and how terrible it is, and how many people like you know the real facts, and they pretend like those facts don't exist. So that's good work that you're doing. Now, we're going to take a little sidestep for a minute. I want to get into the water aspect and what you are doing regarding water. Because, folks, if you think this guy is a little bit of a, my dad was a farmer and I think I know what I'm doing, and you don't really buy it, listen to this, what Kelly has been doing with water. Tell us about what you've been doing there.
As far as water with hemp, or with what I'm doing with my full-time work,
with your full-time work, yeah. Tell us what you're all about.
Okay, so what I do full-time is I manage a statewide water project that's working to increase access and consumption of water in K through 12 schools. So we're working to get the option out there and get the healthier beverages in the hands of children so that they are able to make healthier choices overall. And so those behaviors are instilled younger, and they will then carry to later in life.
Right. So you don't have, you're not interested in Coca-Cola. Is that a problem if I say that? No. Coca-Cola and junk kind of drinks in the schools. You prefer to access clean water. They could use you up in Detroit. They could use you up around Flint, Michigan with that kind of thinking. But I just wanted you to tell the folks what you do as a full-time effort. So once again, even in your professional capacity, you're talking about sustainability. You're talking about making a necessary thing such as clean drinking water accessible to younger kids and training them at an early stage. Educating them properly on the importance of water. And then, so that's a nice tie-in, I think, for what you're doing also with cannabis and hemp.
Thank you, Alan. I appreciate that.
So I just wanted the folks to know that. So tell us a little bit about the history of hemp. You've got a great chart on your site that has a timeline. It's easy access graphics. Everybody who has a little bit of a problem with deeper research can get a really nice snapshot of the timeline. Just take us through that and add in any kind of relevant bits and pieces you might think from back in the day when we used to grow it all the time to where we are these days.
Okay, great. So I do have this. I've created this graphic. It's an infographic, and I'm happy to share it. And I can give my contact information at the end here, so we can.
We will definitely do that. Oh yeah, we'll definitely get your. Well, just throw it out there now.
Yeah.
Where can folks take a look at you online, and then we'll get to this specifics of the history of cannabis and hemp.
So you can find me on Twitter, Kansans, the number 4 hemp. And you can also email me at kelly.rippel@kansans4hemp.com, all spelled out, Kansans for hemp. And
Okay.
that's K-E-L. Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
KELLY.RIPPEL at kansans4hemp.com.
Okay, we'll plug that again at the end of the show just before people hang up or stop listening. Okay, so what happens there? Back in the day, folks were animals and farm animals in your area and all over America were enjoying, as a healthful, nutritive property, this hemp. So what happened?
So as the story goes, hemp was introduced for cultivation purposes when the English settlers came over. And that was around the 1700s. And for example, in the Jamestown colony, they grew hemp for its fiber, and they used it for ropes and sails and for clothing, other types of commodities. In the and I would say it was a mid to late 1700s, Virginia rewarded farmers for cultivating hemp and manufacturing, and they actually imposed penalties upon farmers who did not produce any.
Well, that's amazing because they're also responsible for much of the tobacco, farming as well, right? So were they doing that at the same time?
I believe they were. However, the tobacco, because of their efforts, their lobbying efforts, it was a popular thing. They actually they kind of took over in a way, and it can be argued that tobacco was a competing industry of of hemp. Yeah.
Okay, so let's just go back to the time just before that when it was pretty much mandatory. You say they would be fined if they didn't grow it.
Right. And so it can be said that without hemp, America could not have successfully waged the revolution. And it does say that for the next 150 years, hemp was enjoyed. It enjoyed the position of America's top cash crop, and it was used throughout the early, industrial revolution age, used for a lot of different products.
Wow, that's amazing. Now tell us a little bit of something, because I'm not a farmer or an agrarian type at all, but tell us about clear my head on the science of rotating crops. When you grow corn for a while or various different things, they pull out of the soil particular nutrients. That's why they taste different. That's why they're made up of different components, the end result food. But apparently hemp, you don't have to keep rotating it. Is that right?
That is my understanding as well. And I know that there are research studies out there that have demonstrated this, that hemp does last over time, potentially longer than other crops where you wouldn't have to overseed it or reseed it. But I do also know that there have been some studies done that prove the reintroduction of nutrients after hemp is cultivated improves the overall biodiversity of the soil. And so that's to say that, let's say a farmer wanted to grow corn one year and then he rotated in a crop of hemp. If that farmer went back to corn the next year, he potentially could have a larger yield than the previous crop because of because of the nutrients that hemp provided in the soil.
Oh, that's amazing. So then what happened? We had hemp growing, and that was great, and everybody had to do it because they needed to contribute to the national effort to have this asset. And as you see it, what went wrong? What changed things?
There were a lot of things there. We had a lot of influence from trade agreements from the Philippines. We had during the 1850s, actually, said that hemp lost ground to cheaper products because of this is the introduction of cotton, jute, petroleum, and hemp was processed by hand, and so it was more labor intensive, and there wasn't a lot of introduction or at least investment of the particular machinery that was needed to process it. And so pretty much other types of competing industries such as cotton, synthetic, all the fibers that we know now, those were given more higher priority and more interest.
Okay, and that was for would you say corporate reasons why they were growing more cotton, and it was cheaper or something? It was cheaper.
That is my understanding.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so
Right.
then it became illegal, and they took it out of the food chain for the animals as feed. Is that what happened? Oh gosh, he's cutting in and
right
out. Right
in 1937, that was the marijuana. Can you hear me? Okay.
Well, you're cutting in and out a little bit, so let's just take a second to tell people that we are speaking with Kelly Rippel, and he's a Kansan from the United States, and he knows a lot more about these kinds of things than I do, so that's why I wanted to get him on the line, this healthful property. This is a sustainer of youth and a provider of water and a very knowledgeable man when it comes to all things cannabis and hemp and why it's good, as opposed to, pretending it's bad all the time. So let's hope you're back now and we can continue our chat. Or maybe we can't. Did we lose him? Gee whiz. Okay.
I'm here.
Oh, there you are. Okay, I was just about to call you back. So it's getting a little confusing with the on-off situation with you on the Skype today. So anyway, so what are you doing now, if you can hear me, what are you doing now with cannabis and hemp? Or can you tell us specifically what kinds of programs or research or how you're moving forward with these helpful informations?
So with the data that I've discovered, I'm trying to create a basis or a foundation that we can start having a conversation here in Kansas about the evidence that we know happened in the past, how it was influenced, and really just how we can move forward together.
And appease.
And so,
go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
You go ahead. You're the guest. Go ahead. It's the time gap in the Skype causing me a bit of problem here, but yeah, go ahead.
No worries. So what I've done is I've co-founded a group called Kansans For Hemp with a colleague of mine who lives out in western Kansas, and he works in the farm industry. And we just want to educate people about hemp and about its importance to the history of Kansas, the importance to its economy, and its sustainability moving forward as a state, especially in regards to reinvigorating our rural counties and frontier communities. And as far as medicinal cannabis is concerned, I have been advising Bleeding Kansas advocates, and we've developed a fully comprehensive bill that will regulate the access to cannabis medicine through registered medical providers. And that bill, I just want to throw out there, has been vetted by the Kansas Health Institute for meeting all of its health impact assessment requirements, as well as it's been vetted by the Foundation of Cannabis Unified Standards in Denver, Colorado.
Oh, that's amazing. So just before we spend some more time on there, because we had the Skype fallout and everything, I just wanted to clear up what I was getting into before. Was it sounds like you're making some really good progress there with the government. But, of course, at the time we dropped that on Skype here, I was asking you about how it became illegal in the first place before we get to finding out how to teach these folks how great it is. What was the ground for what were they actually saying at the time to make the decision to end the production of this as a supposedly bad thing?
So what I have on my timeline is in 1937, there was the Marijuana Tax Act, and that was passed by U.S. Congress, and it decriminalized cannabis, and it called it a drug. And the act derived from certain articles that were in newspapers, basically that were funded through newsprint, the owner of the newsprint. And so all of the lobbying that happened at that time that helped pass the Marijuana Tax Act, that kind of went to benefit the industry of wood paper. And so we know that legislation had certain influence behind it, and that kind of legislation, that the influence was very demonstrative of the other types of policies that were being influenced. And so this research is an example of that.
And that was also William Randolph Hearst, the newspaper magnate, right?
Correct.
Yeah, he was making sure that all of his newspapers, that hemp wasn't going to be around to make paper, and somehow he benefited out of that. So this is where we start getting into the corporate interests becoming somehow more valuable than the truthful application for the masses. So that's kind of a tipping point right there. And so now you're at a place in Kansas where it seems to be everybody seems on board. And with the history of these people changing their mind, it can give us a lot of hope.
I personally have hope. The individuals I'm working with have hope. But Alan, we're running up against a lot of barriers in Kansas. We always have. And what's ironic is, we're in the Bible Belt. You were talking earlier about a Bible verse saying that all seeds are for man and for man to use.
Yeah.
And everyone on earth should have this option. Well, those are the people who are believing in the word. Those unfortunately are the conservative and even a lot of others are a lot of influences we're running up against, and it's hard to get messages through. So again, I appreciate you having me on so that I can help talk about this.
Oh yeah, no, it's completely. I find Christians to be a potential ally. Because this is their book saying these things, but I don't understand why they don't realize what their book says about cannabis, and where do they come up with this bogus puritanical notion? And I just think that has something to do with the regression of the education system itself coming from the government as well, because I know there's a lot of well-meaning Christians who would do anything to help themselves or someone else in a medical situation, and they have an artificially created moral barrier from even trying something because it's bad. And they won't acknowledge that their God is saying, not only is it good, he said it was good, and he said, here it is, and he said it's yours. And so I don't understand how they can continue to argue this point, such as the politician I was making fun of earlier. It's very bizarre to me.
Yeah, so hopefully this information I've kind of uncovered will really kind of like help bring the message back to a central point and say, okay, we can acknowledge that this existed, and now we can move forward.
Yeah.
That's my hope, at least.
And that's the kind of they're throwing up blocks. How are they doing that exactly? Like, how are they preventing, and what's the other side that's preventing you from being as successful as you should be? What are they doing? What are their tricks of the trade?
Well, we have a lot of like you said, a lot of well-meaning professionals here, and especially the medical field and in the pharmaceutical field. And so, their lobbying efforts are wanting to, again, protect public health. And I think that if we can just kind of bring the message back to this, that's a shared value. The reason that we're wanting to have medicinal access for cannabis medicine is because we want to protect public health. We want people to be healthy and well, and be able to also at the same time fund youth prevention programs and things that build up that empower children, so that we know those evidence-based practices will improve future generations.
Yeah. Well, what they seem to be doing in Canada and a lot of other places in the world is not that. That's not where they want to allocate the resources. They want to recriminalize the laws and change them around. Just change the laws around a little bit so it seems free here and it's available at the government over there at a certain store, but basically put the money into policing and put the money into prosecution and the judiciary, and then put the money into the probably a lot of them for-profit prisons. And this is the kind of thing we need to avoid. And folks need to understand that this whole paradigm of thought is so ridiculous. And guess what? Particularly when you avail yourself of the power of the cannabis plant, it becomes more and more ridiculous the more time you spend on it. And I think that's one of the reasons they like to quash its availability. But that's just an idea. It seems logical, though. It makes a lot of sense to me.
Yep.
So you're in Kansas, and this is basically the middle of the United States, home of the famous Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz. You're dealing with folks. You're dealing with folks in your own state, and I'm just curious because in Canada we are aware of what all of our surrounding provinces are doing. Do you have any dealings with the folks immediately around you? And there's a lot of them. You've got Oklahoma, Nebraska, and of course Colorado's right beside you. Do you have any dealings with them? And how's it going in Missouri and places like that? Do you have connecting folks? Putting a spider web together of information, or is it just all a strictly Kansas effort for you right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I personally have a network of people that I have kind of collaborated with over time, and a lot of those people are in Colorado, they're in California, Oregon. We do have coalition people who help from the Missouri side, because Kansas City is a large metropolis, both serving Missouri and Kansas.
Right.
So we do have some partnering organizations in that aspect, but we don't have any national backing. A lot of these normal chapters or
that's the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. He means by normal folks.
Correct. Yep. Thank you for that.
Okay.
So there's normal chapters. There are industrial hemp association chapters, and we're trying to establish those within our state as well. But we are kind of working on a grassroots, strictly advocacy, local level at this point. Yeah.
That's cool. Do you ever just swing over to Colorado because it's kind of close and right beside you, and see how it feels there? I'm curious how it feels there because they are so advanced compared to a lot of other places. They started earlier, what was it, 2012 or 13 or something, and they've had a few years of this, and they've made some tax money for it, and a lot of it has gone into education, real education, etc., and benefited the economy. And the one argument I keep hearing about, and I've also not researched this enough to my own liking, is the traffic situation, the driving situation. Are there more accidents? Are there more problems at the wheel in a state like Colorado that's really gone to town compared to everybody else?
So you're a couple different questions there. I could actually spend a whole show on all of those things that you just asked, Alan. But really good stuff. So okay, Colorado, from what I understand, they have had some studies published that show their overall traffic fatalities have gone down. They've since they've legalized in 2012.
Right.
And I believe that I think that has remained consistent, but I can't, don't quote me on that. I can actually get you the studies to prove it. But as far as their economy, what they're doing as far as funding their roads, their transportation systems, all of their community building projects and everything, it's incredible. We all know that. And to be one state over where you're a criminal and then to go across a border and you're a patient, that has actually caused so much problem with we have refugees that have left Kansas, and so that's taxpayer money. That's an economy that we are losing from Kansas to go across the border to Colorado. A lot of schools out west in western Kansas, they're now complaining that students are going across the border and bringing in cannabis and all of that. We need to have some regulation in place that can at least just outline what some expectations are. And it's fascinating, Alan. It's so fascinating to be in a place where we have it's a zero tolerance, and then you go across the border and it's all there.
That's incredible. To be zero tolerance right beside Colorado, but while a lot of your politicians are starting to get the understanding of what it is you're talking about. So you're basically waiting for a chicken to hatch, right? You're trying to nurse an egg right now that it's completely illegal, but then you have so much data and science on how helpful it will be for both the ground itself, probably the water table in your situation will be greatly improved if one crop of cannabis growth is going to boost the next crop of corn growth on the same area. There's a lot of science available, and I'm getting really tired and sick and tired of hearing from these people, well, we don't really have the data for that, so we can't really move on anything, because they keep on ignoring the test results and the scientific results and the community-based results of folks like your neighbors in Colorado. You can't just keep sitting on something and telling people that it doesn't work or there's not enough data when there is enough anecdotal data. It's criminal not to pursue the anecdotal data. And that was proven 16 years ago in England, that the anecdotal history is over and we're now into the hard data. So it's tough, isn't it? It's tough to get by with that every day. I find it difficult when people just refuse to grasp the facts, these elected representatives of ours.
Yep.
I guess that was a statement, not a question, so you weren't sure to come, or maybe the Skype.
No, it's true.
So spend a little time telling us about the medical history. We talked about the availability of hemp, etc., back in 1937 when they quashed it. But what's the medical history that you know about going back? Because mine is very much anecdotal and based in my own self still being able to live on this planet, and I've got some pretty good packets of research tucked away in my lobes. But what do you know about the history of medical cannabis as opposed to the history of just being able to smoke and toke and have a good time?
From what I understand, medicinal cannabis has been used for thousands of years, and it dates back to the early Asian cultures, and it has been used for a multitude of things, to ease conditions, to cure symptoms, and like you said yourself, to cure cancer in some instances. And um, I can the timeline on medicinal cannabis is really long, and I'd be happy to kind of go into more detail on that. But I just there what I am most fascinated about is the actual research that has been done since around the 1970s, because when Dr. Meshulam in Israel synthesized THC, and he was part of the doctor group that really discovered that every mammal has an endocannabinoid system. I think that it's so crucial for people to understand that we are all born with DNA. We are all born with an endocannabinoid system, and ways of modifying it, such as phytocannabinoids, is a method of administration. And so, that I personally believe that all use of cannabis is medicinal, because otherwise our bodies
Hey.
wouldn't have this system.
Okay, so I've talked about this on the show, but maybe someone's listening for the first time, doesn't want to scroll back through all the episodes, although I highly recommend it. Can you tell us in your own words the compound word endocannabinoid system? What does that mean exactly, and what is cannabis or marijuana to that, as far as you understand it?
From
The
my
endocannabinoid system, like endo means the body has it and it's not an exterior thing. It's an interior thing that we're born with, just like your stomach and your heart and all these other things. So what is the endocannabinoid system, and how does it respond to its input of cannabis?
Yeah, so based on my understanding, the endocannabinoid system is a series locations in cannabinoid receptor.
It's a
And
series of
so
We're
they
breaking
have
up, so I'm just
concentrate.
going to cut in and just re-utter that for the folks, because you're breaking up a little bit. Maybe this will buy us some more Skype clearage time. It's a series of receptors in your body that are specifically designed to receive the properties from the cannabis plant, right?
That is correct.
Okay, and this is important because why?
Because as scientists have found through mapping technologies, such as CAT scans and MRI scans, they've found that those receptors are concentrated in certain parts of your body, like the brain and the stomach, like the gut area. And so what they've found over time is that the endocannabinoid system is involved with so many different regulatory processes throughout the body. And what its ultimate goal is to maintain homeostasis.
Okay, that's a great way to put it. And for those folks that don't know what homeostasis is, it's not something that you put on the stove to eat. It's the body's system of homeostasis, what it means. Let's go to that. Define homeostasis at dictionary.com. It's the tendency of a system, especially the physiological system of higher animals, and I would hope that even the harshest critic of cannabis would consider himself to be a higher animal, to maintain internal stability, owing to the coordinated response of its parts to any situation or stimulus that would tend to disturb its normal condition or function, which is a pretty amazing thing that cannabis contributes to that. But it's once you get over the amazingness of it, it's just logical. And I think that people don't realize that there's a lot of, try to get through your life without any vitamin C. Would you agree?
Yes. And let me just take that notion a little bit further as far as the specific vitamin of vitamin C.
Okay,
It was explained to me one time that from an endocannabinoid researcher that a certain law that only allows for CBD only to be legal and regulated, that is the equivalent of synthesizing vitamin C from oranges to treat people with scurvy, because there are so many other conditions that cannot be treated because you don't have the full cannabinoid profile, that you would eliminate thousands of people from using a method of administration of medicine. So the whole CBD only laws and all that is deriving, unfortunately, from the same influence and interest that put the THC in legislation, and it should have never been in a law.
That's
What other
incredible.
law has a constituent of a plant? We don't put an element of corn in our laws. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah. And then up here, when it's a medicine and they finally concede to this, then they're taxing it in such a way that they don't tax normal pharma product.
Right.
So there are a lot of double-edged swords and an agenda here moving forward. So I really have to thank you for being on the end of getting through the truth. And I know we could talk for hours about all kinds of things, and I sure hope that we get to do that in the future and sometime next year. And I want to hear some more progress from what you've been able to do there in Kansas. Kelly Rippel, once again, we're going to put out your name. Kelly Rippel, it's Kelly, not EY. Kelly. Rippel is not regular Ripple, it's Rippel. How's your dad doing?
He's wonderful. He's doing great. He's retired. He loves life.
That's good. And I guess he's proud of you to sort of carry the torch and kick open the doors of obfuscation here in these times as we approach 2020. And we should really just get this availability for everybody that needs it, right? I guess he's pretty happy you've taken that torch up and run with it.
He is proud, yes. And I'm very lucky to have him in my life.
You sure are. Well, it sounds like a great family. Tell us again where we can find you online, etc., and understand the great works you're doing to provide water for school children and this fantastic wedge of information that you keep on pushing through the lies. Tell us where we can get you again, and we'll talk to you another time.
Okay, so you can find me at Kansans For Hemp. That's the number 4, Kansans For Hemp, on Twitter. And you can check out Bleeding for Kansas. That's the medicinal coalition. And you can also check them out at bksadvocates.org. My personal email is kelly.rippel@kansasforhemp.com. And Alan, I really appreciate it. And, I guess one of the silver linings is one of the last states to legalize. We've watched everyone do it, and so that's one of the reasons why we have all this great data. So
that is great, yeah. And hopefully you can use everyone else's advancements and successes on the one hand and find out where all of the errors are, leaning towards the punitive and favoring the officialdom and the police of the culture, and put them at the bottom of the pile where they deserve to be. I hope you can move ahead with that. You do have an advantage lingering in the background, I guess up there with Wisconsin. It's also zero tolerance up there and probably some other places. So, yeah, use everyone else's mistakes to your benefit. Take a look at what we're doing in Canada. We're all heavy on the mistake side. So basically it's a template of what not to do. So avail yourself of that information as well. And that is Kelly. He is gone. That's the end of that. I'm glad we had him on the show. It's very important that we understand ancient weed history. And we're going to talk a little bit more before we go on some updates of what's been going on here in Canada. And that is